We're down here at Chaparral Motorsports picking up the 2020 250F motocross bikes that I'm using for this shootout. Just like my 450 shootout, I wanted to deal with this the same way that you, the consumer, does. Going down to the shop, getting all 6 bikes, breaking them in, touching them, working on them myself, and being able to take it out for 2 days at 2 different tracks with 6 other riders other than myself to build an opinion on, because really that's what shootout is. It's us explaining what we think of the characteristics. And no, this isn't a big durability test. If we were to do that, we'd be honestly months down the road. The point of this shootout is to give you guys a quick peek at the characteristics of these machines so you can learn which bike might suit you best. Because while honestly all the motorcycles in this test are good in their own right, it's really an amazing experience, great riding experience when you find the bike that suits you, that matches your preference and your style on the track. It can really make the track experience that much more fun, and that is my ultimate goal when I do these features. So this video is for you guys that like it short and sweet. I'm gonna spend about 2 minutes explaining each bike's characteristics. You're gonna see the scores pop up down below, but if you wanna understand those scores, understand these test riders a little bit more, I will be releasing much more detailed videos individually about each model over the next week or 2, just like I did with the 450 shootout. So for all you guys that really wanna hear each rider's comments, learn more even about those test riders, and try to learn about their riding and all that stuff, check out those videos. But we're gonna jump right into this 6th place Suzuki RM-Z250. Sad to say, this bike actually finished 6th with all 7 test riders. The bike is unchanged from last year, and that's how it finished last year, so it kind of wasn't a surprise. Every rider gave it a fair shot though. They tried all the setup options they could in the time being, but man, it's just a hard bike to set up. It's a combination of suspension and chassis just being overall too stiff and rigid. And even for some of the largest test riders in the group or faster ones, it's still just too much. They all come in saying, man, it's rigid, it rides high in the stroke, it doesn't settle down, it's a little bit deflective everywhere, and it's hard to get that comfort out of it. Now, in saying that, it is a Suzuki, it is very precise, it has great turn-in response, but it's just a little too far that direction to kind of appease the riders on the day-to-day basis. Talking about the engine, like Suzuki's been for the past couple years, it has really good low to mid response. It has a nice snappy, throaty feel off the bottom. It feels very connected to the wrist, but it still doesn't have the top end power needed to compete with the rest of the bikes. Now don't get me wrong, the engine changes last year definitely helped in that regard. It went from being way behind the field to right up there, just kind of right off the cusp of being super competitive in the motor package. So it's not the distance off, it's definitely good, it's rideable. A lot of riders enjoy it in that aspect, but it's that handling package that kind of gives it up in the end. But there is a bright side. The bike is a bargain at most dealerships, and if you're looking at getting into the sport or you just want a new 250, but you're trying to save a few dollars and try to keep that budget tight, you're still gonna have a good riding experience and still worth checking out the RM-Z250. In 5th place is the Husqvarna FC 250. Now, admittedly, this was a tough decision for a lot of the test riders because, well, the bike isn't bad. It has some really redeeming qualities, but it has a few negatives that kind of ended up with a split decision, and it's really over the type of rider it suits. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit because Husqvarna has definitely stepped away from KTM in the way they're setting up their bikes. A lot more niche-like plush, softer spring rates, and just valving that, like I said, settles in a lot more, is a lot plusher, but tries to ramp up for the hold-up when you hit things aggressively. So when you're going through deep braking bumps and you're just in choppy sections, the bike floats through it, but at the same time, it's so soft and plush that it's kind of always moving. It never really settles down. So if you charge deep into a gnarly rut, you get into the corner and the bike has not stopped moving. It's still teetering front to rear, and it makes it kind of hard to control as an aggressive level rider. You're trying to hang on to it because it's always moving and hasn't settled down. But it brings out comfort that can give you a lot of confidence in the machine as well. And then the motor itself also kind of falls in a weird split decision. On one end, pros like it because you can scream it super high up and that's where it makes a lot of power, but right off the bottom, it's a little lethargic with its rev character. It comes off the low RPMs and takes a long time to build. And even with a lot of clutch manipulation, the engine doesn't come to life that quick. So if somebody's looking for really smooth power and easy to use, would like the bike, but some of the aggressive riders definitely feel like they're shifting it too much and they don't get enough engine recovery in the situations that they need it. So like I said, the aggressive level rider, man, there's a few things on the setup that just aren't there, but for the entry level, the vet guy that wants a smooth, easy use package, this is probably the 250F for them. Landing in 4th place is the Kawasaki KX250. Now this is the bike in the test with the most changes, even though it may not physically look as much, and a big change there was with that engine. Last year we had a bike that had a lot low to mid response. Now we've got a bike that is definitely a screamer, and a bunch of guys liked it for those qualities. It's definitely a lot more of an aggressive package and something that is a lot more fun to ride. And definitely our more expert level riders really appreciated the balance of the engine characteristic this year. Now, where some of the negatives came up with, it is a very aggressive bike to ride. They did change around the suspension components, and everybody agrees that the suspension settings are definitely a big upgrade from last year. But especially up on the front fork, man, it's aggressive. It's got a little bit of a high spring rate, so some of the heavier guys liked it, and one of our pro level riders really liked it because of how far and hard he could throw it into things. But for some of the more middle class riders, it's just a little too stiff. It kind of jumps around on the front, it feels rigid, and it's hard to settle into corners. So at the end of the day, it has a mixed bag between the engine and handling characteristics, something that the aggressive rider likes, something that isn't the easiest to manage without the skills behind it. Now, also talking about the ergonomics is interesting. The Kawi does have a lot of options there with the bar mount foot peg options. It definitely works well for a tall rider when you drop down those pegs because it has really tall bars on it. Now, if you're a smaller rider, the back half of the bike is really small feeling and you settle way down in it, but the bars are really tall. And between the stiff front end and softer rear, the bike just feels like a chopper at all times. It's got a little bit of weird ergonomics there. They're hard to overcome, and it definitely has to be what you want to be fully comfortable on the machine. And that's what it came down to at the end of the day. There's just some big positives with this bike this year, but a few things that just don't suit the guys in the test. Now we're getting up into the podium positions, and if you're gonna check the scores below, you're gonna be shocked at how close it was. Really, just one extra test rider could throw this in any which way. But in 3rd place is the KTM 250 SXF. The KTM has some really great and rounded characteristics that puts it up here. Starting with an excellent engine. The KTMs are known for huge horsepower numbers, and yes, the KTM 250 is great mid to top and continues to pull all the way right up to where you hit the rev limiter. It doesn't really feel like that it ever goes and fully signs off where it noses over. It just continues to pull till it finally hits that limiter. Down below though, it still has a good amount of torque. It doesn't have the bark of say the Yamaha, but man, it still has good enough roll-on characteristic to be great for tight jumps right out of the corner, and overall the engine just feels racy. It has a nice snap, quick rev response all the way through. Now getting over to the chassis, the KTM is definitely a little bit more precise than the Husky, but it still offers some of that comfort that you only find in a steel chrome ollie chassis. It just flexes a little bit more, settles into stuff a little bit, but at the same time there is some rigidity issues at the very front of the chassis. That between the air fork doesn't make it the easiest for all riders to set up, and that was kind of the biggest complaint. Just that whole front end where it's the steering stem area, the clamps, the bars, the forks, just everybody felt like there was a little more energy transfer up there, and it's a weird mixed bag. The lightest, slowest riders thought the fork was too stiff, but even the fastest guys were blowing through, and we just couldn't find that happy medium range to really push it up into that final 2 spots. But like I said, the KTM is physically light. It has great brakes, great clutch, all the items that we are used to from this bike, but it's just missing out a little bit on the comfort that neither the slower riders or the fastest could quite push it into that top 2. Now, 2nd place in the shootout is definitely the biggest shocker for me personally because, well, we ended up with a tie for the win and we had to break it, which we will explain in a second how we came to that conclusion, but we did have 2nd place with the Yamaha YZ250F. The Yamaha has done phenomenally well in shootouts for years now, and that's for one main reason, the engine. Yes, the 250 class, it really comes down to how that thing performs, and YZ kills it there. It has this amazing low to mid response, a lot of grunt and torque feel unlike anything in the class, and anybody can appreciate, whether they're a vet rider or just a beginner amateur, even up to a pro level rider, that power is so usable and it gets you out of so many bad situations. It makes the bike very consistent lap to lap. And another big part of that is Yamaha's gear spacing. 2nd, 3rd to 4th is this nice consistent range. You have that low to mid. It makes it where you can make a lot of mistakes and the power can get you out of it. Yamaha really went to work last year to try to get it some more top end grunt, and while it is better, It's still a little bit off the KTM and the Honda in that respect. It's good, but not quite there to complete the full range. Where it comes down to the negativity is usually with the ergos. The Yamaha is still a bit odd in that sense. It's a little wider feeling up on the shrouds. It's kind of the way they taper up top. The way it comes to the exhaust starting on the side plane pushing off, it doesn't feel like the lightest, most nimble bike in the class. It also comes down to the seat to foot peg height is a little bit cramped for the taller riders. Everybody knows that their knees feel a little more compressed on this bike when sitting. And then the bar placement's a little bit odd in a weird sweep. Just those kind of ergos unsettle a lot of guys. While they're able to adapt to it because the Yamaha offers some really good chassis comfort, it just doesn't feel like the bike you can ride the most aggressively from an ergonomic standpoint. Talking about that suspension, yes, the Yamaha is very plush. For some of the most fast expert level riders, it's almost a little bit too soft at certain points with that chassis suspension combination. It's not as precise as they'd like. But for the amateurs and the vet level riders, it's really on point to give them the comfort they are looking for. Like I said, it was close with this, and really what costs out the Yamaha in the end, or has its negativity, is a little bit of those ergos and some of the precision for the fastest level riders. But I think we can all agree that the engine brings it up in the capability of having the top spot. Well, I'm sure you figured it out by now, but that means we have awarded the win to the Honda CRF250R, and, well, we had a tie. We had to come up with a tiebreaker. So, to put it simply, we picked which bike had the most wins for test riders. The Yamaha had 2 wins on the board, and the Honda had 3, as you can see by the math below, and that's pretty much how we came to this decision. Both bikes are amazing, and from here on, we're gonna break down that Honda and what made it so good. And really what it comes down to is the ergonomics, the chassis and suspension, man. It suits a range of riders. We had everybody from our pro level test riders, our vets, to our amateurs that all really enjoy that motorcycle. The chassis is just precise enough, both front and rear steer, to make the fastest riders happy, the slowest guys. We can all throw to any corner we want to. It tracks great. There's really no complaints there. And then the suspension is just right in the middle and just adjustable enough. Once again, we had it nice and comfortable for the slow guys, and our fastest pro riders could get just enough hold up out of the bike that they could really ride it as aggressive as they wanted to. And what everybody really labeled this bike was with fun factor. The engine, yes, it does not have a lot of grunt off the bottom, but Honda has really gone to work over the last 2 years with updates to try to get more usable. The biggest change in that is the gear ratios this year. It really helped that second to third to fourth gap and how even and consistent they were, enough that yes, it is still preferable if you scream this bike to the top of the RPM range, but an occasional short shift here and there isn't a complete killer like it was on last year's bike. You can get away with a little bit wider range of how you use that engine. It just suits a little bit wider range of riders. Yes, it's still not probably perfect for the vet level guy that kind of is looking for that right off the bottom snap that's maybe a little bit lazier with the way they ride, or that beginner level rider that isn't used to pulling it through each gear that hard. But it's not quite the 125-ish 4-stroke it was 2 years ago when they introduced these updates, and it just came together to an even enough package to tie for the win and land our top spot. Now I say this with every shootout, this thing is not the end-all be-all. You shouldn't be rushing out and only thinking about the first place bike and disregarding everything below it. Each bike has its good characteristics, it has its positives, and it has ways that it could suit you out on the track and give you the best riding experience. So I implore you that if you're really looking to make a purchase this year, listen to all the extended videos, watch other people's shootouts, do what you can to research and learn which bike is best for you, because in our case, like I said, 7 test riders, 2 tracks in Southern California. We're giving you the info that is best and honest as we can do it, and hopefully you find some heavy use of it. If you enjoyed this shootout, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure you hit subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and check out my channel. We have definitely way more bike reviews coming, project bikes, and great things like that. Thank you so much for tuning in.